Welcome back to the Torque Test channel. This is the new Gen 2 of Milwaukee's Surge, their quiet hydraulic impact driver out this past week. And this is DeWALT's latest hydraulic impact driver, the DCF 870. People have asked for a head-to-head, and here it is, along with versus the Gen 1 Surge we'll be comparing it to. But this is out of left field. Coming in screen right though, this is the hyper tough, same deal, hydraulic impact driver debuting same time as that Milwaukee for, of course, 1/3 the price, just to make them all look bad in the dollar department, assuming it works. So let's find out today as we test torque. Sure, it's our channel name, but torque for an impact driver, I mean, it's what we can do well here, but especially for a hydraulic type, not known for their power or why you'd be buying it. So we'll also be testing driving speed and their sound level on these things as well. Plus plenty of oddities when it comes to driving smaller fasteners we'll be showing to provide a fuller picture today on these tools than simply pure performance. This is the new Milwaukee 2761 second generation Surge. We paid $199 for it, priced the same as DeWalt when we bought that, though I've seen those go for even a bit more lately. And it's meant to be taking on this, the Gen 1 Surge, according to Milwaukee. They don't show their usually different color comparisons on boxes or packaging. Most of it is all versus this guy, the Gen 1, and it is shorter than that Gen 1. We're talking 5 inches flat versus 4.3 inches. That is a big difference when you're between wall studs, and not altogether much more stocky, just more squared off at the front where the tri-lights are. In fact, it's a lot like their current M18 impact driver, like their more common non-hydraulic model, and it's even shorter than that, in fact, 4.4 or 4.5 inches versus 4.3, so that makes this their shortest M18 fuel impact period of any type, to my knowledge. And the idea behind these is, well, they are less ear-piercing to use than traditional impact drivers. Can be nice around the house, maybe around your kids. Was that loud, buddy?
No, the quiet one.
Or on non-remote job sites, not far away from businesses or their customers for those businesses. For the most part, it's selling the idea of doing the same task with fluid-filled oil impulses rather than click-clackety hammers. And this is the yellow tool not too long ago released by DeWalt, the DCF 870, that we've bought and tested last time, looking at these versus the existing Gen 1 Milwaukee of the time. Oddly, absently from any Milwaukee comparisons, this model, despite quite the difference in torque claims, no one really buys these for their torque specs, I don't think. We've not even placed torque claims on our ranking chart for that. Not the leading reason you might be buying a specific one of these. But this new guy says 1,000 inch-pounds, and this one says 500 inch-pounds. Quite the difference. The DeWalt, of course, makes more than that, we found, so we'll have to see how that compares. Let's head over to our first test, which is working torque, 5 seconds and forward. The vast majority of impact drivers make their torque claims in this very initial test, where the DeWalt passing up the Gen 1 Surge by quite a bit here. The Gen 2 says 1,000 inch-pounds on the new Milwaukee, though, and that's about 83 foot-pounds. Here it is. So 53 foot-pounds, just over a 35% increase over Gen 1, so that's good, but also not 83 foot-pounds or getting up to where the DeWalt hydraulic is either. More tests to come, including reverse, but up next we have a new hydraulic entry for less than in the 2 bills club. Well, it's less than even 1 bill. It's just 65 bucks, in fact, and it comes only as a kit like this. This is the new brushless, hyper tough, quiet hydraulic impact driver, and it's all blacked out. Generally speaking, the more black the hyper tough cordless tool, the more brushless and recent it is lately, mostly coming from the folks over at Shervon making these. This is rated at 561 inch-pounds, so around what the DeWalt says, and it's a bit longer as well, just over 4.7 inches, rather than 4.3, which is noticeable, but still shorter than the Gen 1 Surge. We test these with each brand's sort of standard 2P, 2 rows in parallel battery packs, but we will be trying out some spicier options to see if they can make a difference coming up, which oddly for this Hyper Tough is the Clutch brand working on it, an 8 amp hour pack for this guy. Let's start things out with working torque on this one. Here's the Hyper Tough on screen in Walmart blue. 35 foot-pounds. Not a lot, but also pretty close to the original Surge, which is, to this day, a lot more coin. Let's head over to reverse, 10 seconds to see if we can get any closer. Reverse is the area where DeWalt hits much lower in, sort of makes sense, and the Gen 1 Surge does much higher in, oddly, I think, so things are much closer between these two, and here's the Hyper Tough hydraulic fitting in there. $43 foot-pounds, so not enough to impress in reverse, where the Gen 1 Surge saw a surge in torque comparatively. It did have a bit of a hitch in its giddy-up from moment one, but that is indicative of this tool in general. We feel it will just do that sometimes, even in the middle of a run using it, sort of stall out for a second, so we're leaving it in here. It is representative. Here's the Gen 2 Milwaukee Surge. $61 foot-pounds. That's right, not able to take advantage in this test where the DeWALT's is lower than usual, or even really from what we can tell best the Gen 1. It's worth mentioning we do multiple tests each time, and with hydraulic impact drivers in particular, even warm them up and have cool down brakes to try to spot any differences as the fluid inside heats up and viscosity changes. We try to control for that, and still, this never got really any further north than this. I'm curious to see if others see this phenomenon in testing, though as a driver, especially this type, it could just be a quirk Milwaukee figured out about the old model, and now they're favoring forward rather than reverse, as these fluid guys seem to have a preference with how they work directionally inside. So not a bad thing if you have to pick a direction to prefer. And as for the Milwaukee, that's going to be this direction, forward. Their final stop, 10 seconds max torque and forward. Hyper Tough is up first from Walmart. $55 foot-pounds, and it did it, topping the most the Gen 1 M18 Surge could do. They actually make a hydraulic impact driver that could basically compare to the max performance of the existing Milwaukee model that was out there when they were likely working on this. It's pretty cool for that fact alone. It is a bit of a weird one, as I mentioned though, and its collet sort of floats around and wobbles all around while in use, which looks concerning while you're using it. It has some weirdness going on with it for sure. And here is the M18 Surge Gen 2. $67 foot-pounds. The new Surge makes most in forward, but it's not gobs of power for sure. It's maintaining a 35 to 40% increase over the Gen 1 each time in this direction, which is probably why they've been doing comparisons as the Gen 1 versus Gen 2 at Milwaukee Pipeline and SEMA, and not against the competition like they normally do for almost everything else, their impacts, ratchets, most of their power tools in general, because the DeWalt is just, it's a bruiser. I wouldn't call this super close in pure torque. Batteries are also something that aren't going to push these tools one way or the other, which for something this size I think is a plus. The Hyper Tough is going to be almost flat, maybe a small increase from 55 to 59 using the clutch from a different brand, and the others will stay flat. Didn't see any increase from a Forge pack, which again, I'd rather use a smaller battery, so that is a good thing. And the DCF 870, which size-wise just fits nicely with DeWalt's newer 3.5 amp hour power stack, it's also about flat. 117 versus 120 foot-pounds, so there's no downside, at least for using smaller batteries, but also no upside doing the opposite. The Milwaukee has some massive impacts per minute though, 6,300. That's pretty up there. That's no doubt going to drive some things quickly, which is perhaps going to be your goal more than just torque or size of lag bolt you can tackle. The Gen 1 Surge got left in the dust by the new DCF 870, and many viewers, fans of Team Red, I would imagine, pointed out this comparison wasn't on an even playing field due to the age of the Surge that they were still selling. Well, we can't control which brands put out new tools and when they do that, but we can test them when they do come out. And here's that, the Gen 2 Surge up against the DCF 870 in our nylon nut driving test that represents some good resistance to drive, but doesn't take mega torque like a large bolt. It is a big improvement over the past model, but still not keeping up with the brute that is the DeWalt and driving speed as well, it seems, or it would appear to us based on the data we've seen. And here is the Hyper Tough. "13.9 seconds, a lot closer than I would have expected, especially with an advertised 4,100 blows per minute. They just seem to be more impactful blows, and I do feel that, I suppose. All right, last up, the reason these sort of exist is sound pressure, how loud they are. While we get about 98 to 101 decibels from traditional impact drivers from this 1 meter distance, the DeWalt is averaging 92.6 across a 5-second period, which is, especially with decibels being logarithmic, a lot quieter than this traditional impact driver. The Gen 2 Milwaukee Surge comes in at an average of 92.7, which is to say about the same as the DeWalt. The Hyper Tough's impacts are more like thuds, and it sees a 92.3 average, same as the Gen 1 Surge, and probably a bit more of a pleasant pitch, if you were to ask me as well. When comparing decibel percentages difference-wise, it is more than you might think looking at the numbers. Here, with 50 being a perfect score, or best to date, the other two tools get proportionally 47 and 46 points accordingly, while a traditional impact driver would get nearly 0 points with this scaling. So let's total the rest of these scores, then we'll talk about the finer points of using and valuing tools like these. But strictly by the points, stuff we can objectively measure, the dyno runs are turned into points that look like this. Then their driving speed is compared as a proportion of the best to date, as well with the 50-point max here for the best result. So we get 39.6 points and 37 points when it comes to driving speed. Next up is power to size, for where you can fit these tools, and the Milwaukee gets 15.6 to the Hyper Tough's 11.6. All of these stats, when they're totaled up in performance and quietness compared to price, and yeah, the Milwaukee's $199, so it's going to get less here, 6.9 points versus 19.3. Though it isn't a clean comparison until they sell this tool bare. That totals 145.1 and 144.5. Nearly the same, with the M18, I guess, sort of edging it out here on the ranking, if you could call it that. And a noticeable improvement overall versus the Gen 1 Surge, even accounting for price here, though all of these are a bit far removed from the DeWalt, here remaining in the top spot. However, it might be closer than you might think when looking at all this. You see, when it comes to fine work, which you might be more likely to be doing with a hydraulic impact driver, interior work inside someone's house, the DeWalt impacts on everything, pretty much from moment one, to the point I've personally stopped using it for this sort of stuff. And since I have traditional impact drivers for the larger stuff, well, what I'd call the resolution on this tool is just not very fine. Like, it will impact on everything when other drivers will spin up until you need some impacting to seat the screw. This is something the new Gen 2 Surge does well. It has the ability to screw it in, then use the much smaller individual impacts compared to the DeWalt to seat it in with fine impacting resolution, not large hits. The DeWalt has larger hits and uses that instantly, which can be, well, something you have to keep in mind when personally I don't want to have to keep anything in mind ever. The Hyper Tough has a whole lot of different stuff going on. It acts, between these two, more like the DeWalt in that it impacts early, and then sometimes it will shimmy and shake, like often, really, and even get into a bout of reversing all the screws you're still setting while still driving it and forward. All this footage here you're seeing is with the finger still lightly on the trigger in forward. It just decides once seated to flip into reverse. Tool still in forward, just starts reversing, mainly when driving things lightly, but still it is very strange. So despite what the ranking looks like, which is accurate, we think, on things we can measure, our end of video recommendations look like this, and there's one for each of these. The Hyper Tough works. Its performance is equal or better to the original M18 Surge for 1/3 the price. If you want an impact driver that's quiet for $60, that's this. It's low risk if you want to pick one up and try it out. It's the only one that's wallet friendly. DeWalt and the new Milwaukee are both good options for completely different reasons. Look at this dyno graph between each brand's closest in size traditional impact driver and each brand's new hydraulic impact driver. If you don't own an impact driver or are looking to replace your current or very old model, the DeWalt DCF 870, it can do that. Look how close it gets to a regular one while being much quieter. So it's the hydraulic that comes close to replacing the brands whose batteries you might already own's traditional impact driver more than any other on the market. So you can basically do everything you do now quieter by choosing this over that. Milwaukee, their tool that looks like this guy, but less black on it, makes a lot of sauce. If you already own that or just have a good powerful impact driver, getting the new M18 Surge Gen 2 in addition to that then does all the stuff you might reach for a hydraulic for, and can install light switch covers without having to impact on those screws up against the brittle plastic in a way that the DeWALT might be. It does finish work and smaller stuff well with much more resolution, more trigger control. Your finger's always deciding how much is happening and not just sort of a participant. But it won't, we feel, looking at this gap, again, replace your daily impact driver. That's how we see it, as not everything is always quantitative, but still want to touch on it here when we feel it's important. Though be sure to check out woodworking channels and other sources you're used to checking out with who may be far more equipped to lend their experience to these tools, as we're just one small piece of the puzzle. We try to bring you these puzzle pieces each week, each Friday. Thanks for watching.